The snow fell thick as wool upon the silent roofs of Denver Junction, a forgotten rail stop lost twixt mountain and plain. It was the year of our Lord 1894, a cruel winter, cold enough to make the brass rails sing with frost and the cattle die standing. In that night storm, the world seemed a ghost for ice and wind. A lonely figure stepped from the shadows of the depot, a tall man clad in a duster coat of brown hide, hat pulled low, boots ringing sharp on the frozen boards. He was known from Wyoming to Santa Fe, John Westran, the millionaire cowboy, a man who had made his fortune not in silver, but in land and cattle. His heart, tough, was a lonely prairie, wide, silent, and a chin for something the world had taken from him long ago. He came to the station for no reason other than habit. He would stand there, some nights, staring down the line as if expecting someone to return. The snow whispered around him like old ghosts. Then, a cry, not loud, not shout, but the faint gasp of one half buried in the drift. Westran turned quick, eyes narrowing beneath the brim. He strode through the storm to the platform's far end, where a figure lay slumped beside a trunk half covered in snow. A woman, dressed in a nurse's coat, her hair whipped by the wind like spaghetti wheat. Her hands were blue, her lips trembling. "Ma'am," he said, voice low and rough as gravel, "you'll freeze where you lay." Her eyes fluttered open, pale gray, wide with fright. Uno missed the train," she whispered. "There was another due, but the agent said, no more tonight." "Then you're bound for heaven if you stay," he muttered. Without another word, he stooped and lifted her, light as a child in his arms, and carried her through the snow to his waiting carriage. The Mary whinnied as the door SW when he opened. He wrapped the woman in his heavy buffalo coat and took the reins. "Hold on," he said. "We'll have you one afore the clock strikes 10. The road to Westran Ranch wound through a pass where the wind sang like wolves. The woman stirred once or twice, her breath weak against his shoulder. He asked no questions, she had the look of one who'd seen more sorrow than comfort. When they reached the house, a great timber hall with firelight spilling from its windows, he carried her inside. Old Martha, his housekeeper, gasped at the sight. "Mercy, Mr. Westran, you brought in a snow angel or a ghost?" "Neither," said he. "Get broth, blankets, and brandy. She's half ice already." The woman slept along that night before the hearth, and when she woke come morning, the room was warm and filled with the smell of coffee and pine. Westran sat across the fire, polishing his spurs, saying nothing. She looked about her, bewildered. "Where am I?" "On Westran land," he answered. "Name's John." "You, Clara," she said softly. "Clara Winslow, nurse at St. Mary's Hospital, Denver. I was to take the night train east to care for a wounded soldier in Cheyenne. But he arrived too late. My pulse was stolen. The wind came up and you near froze to death," he finished. She lowered her gaze. "I owe you my life. Roger, ain't much to owe. I was just in the right place." But from that night, something unspoken began between them, not passion yet, but a quiet tether, as though fate herself had tied a string between two hearts too weary to fight it. Days passed, the storm deepened, and the trains stopped running altogether. Clara stayed on, helping Martha about the kitchen, tending to Westran's ranch hands who came in from the blizzards frostbitten and cooking. She walked gentle as sunlight through smoke, her hands steady, her voice kind. Westran watched her often, though he never said much. He had buried a wife on set years before, and the memory lay like iron under his ribs. But Clara's presence oftened him in ways he hadn't thought possible. He began to smile again. One evening, after supper, the two of them sat by the window, watching the wind blow silver across the hills. Clara spoke first. "You've everything a man could want, land, money, horses. And yet, you seem alone." He looked down at his hands. "Things don't fill the hollow, Miss Winslow. I've tried, and what does?" He met her eyes. "He reckoned he ain't found it yet." There was silence. The fire crackled like a gunshot. Then she smiled faintly and said, "Perhaps you just did." He felt his chest tighten, like a rope pulled out. "Clara," he began, but the words died. She only reached across and took his hand. The blizzard broke 2 days later. The sky turned gold with sunrise, and the first train whistled in a fortnight each-way through the valley. Clara stood on the polk, suitcase packed. "He should bow," she said, looking toward the track. "My word, Cals." Westran stepped beside her, his breath a cloud in the cold. "And if he said stay?" She smiled sadly. "You're kind, John, but my duty's to others, to the sick, the wounded." I'd no right to stay where my heart might forget that. I said nothing, only nodded once. The train whistle came again, lonely and far. But when she turned to leave, I caught her hand. Clara Winslow, I said softly, if ever your duty leads you west again, my door's open. Always. She looked up at him, those grey eyes bright as winter sunlight, and whispered, I'll remember. Then she was gone, coat fluttering like a white flag down the hill. Years rolled like dust over the plains. Westran grew richer, older, lonelier. Men came to call him the Ice King, for his millet at none and loved no more. But on certain nights, when the snow fell thick and silent, I would ride down to the station and watch the line, waiting. Then one spring morning, as the lilacs bloomed, a telegram came, returning west. Bringing wounded men for your hospital, say. Winslow, I read it twice, the words burning like brandy. That evening, I saddled his horse and rode to Denver Junction. When the train hissed to a halt, I saw her, older, stronger, but with the same light in her eyes. She stepped down, and for a moment the years melted away. John Westran, she said, smiling through tears. I took off his hat, voice rough as before. Reckon you found your way back. Say and see did, she whispered. I offered his arm, and she took it. The station clock struck noon, and the crowd moved around them like shadows, but they stood still, to those who had crossed the storm and found home again. From that day forth, the story of the millionaire cowboy and the freezing north spread across the plains, told by ranch hands and railmen, printed in city papers, some by travelers under starlight. They married that autumn beneath the cottonwoods of Westran Ranch, and their love, born of snow and silence, became legend, the kind of tale that made even the roguest cowpoke believe that sometimes the coldest nights bring the warmest hearts. And so they lived, not in riches alone, but in the quiet grace of two hearts mended by mercy, bound not by promise but by destiny, and their story, simple yet eternal, was written in the wind that still whispers across the western plains. Spring had come to the valley, washing the plains in green, and for the first time in years, laughter had returned to Westran Ranch. Clara Winslow stood by the window of the ranch hospital, a long wooden hall John Westran had built with his own hands, watching the wounded men resting in clean cots. Their bronze had softened into sighs of healing. The air smelled of medicine, soap, and lilacs from the hills. John entered quietly, hat in hand. His boots made no sound on the polished pine floor. Dr. Evans says the last of them will walk before summer's end, he said. Clara turned, smiling faintly. That's good news. Dick suffered enough wars for a lifetime. And nodded, his gaze drifting over the beds, then to her face. She wore a plain white apron, her sleeves rolled up, her hair pinned but loose from the day's work. I'd seen her 100 times now, and every time, it struck him like the first sunrise after a long winter. Clara, I said softly, you've turned this place into a home. She looked at him with a warmth that almost hurt. It was your bold that built it, John. Not me. I shook his head. Bold downhill men. Hands though, yours. The silence between them deepened, soft, not heavy, and for a moment, time itself seemed to hold still. Then Martha, the old housekeeper, burst through the door. Mr. Westran, there's trouble down by the river. The floods come early, and the bridge is near gone. John's had snapped onto his head in one motion. Get the wagon team ready. Clara, stay here. But she was already reaching for her coat. I'm coming. If men are hurt, you'll need me. Opened his mouth to argue, but her eyes, fierce and steady, stopped him. All right, I said at last. Stay close. Dion. The river was wild that day, swollen from melted snow, tearing through the valley like a beast-unchained. The bridge, half broken, groaned under the weight of two wagons stranded mid-crossing. Cattle bawled, men shouted, ropes snapped. Westran leaped from his horse and waded into the chaos, shouting orders. Get the lines tied higher. Don't let that wagon drift. Clara ran to the bank where a young ranch hand lay pinned beneath a beam. His leg was crushed, the water lapping at his boots. Hold on, she told him, kneeling beside him. You're not done fighting yet. With a strength that surprised even herself, she tore strips from her coat and bound his wound tight. Westran came beside her, water up to his waist, and together they pulled the boy free just as the bridge gave way behind them. They fell onto the shore, breathless and soaked, the boy alive but unconscious. For a moment, Clara looked up, rain mixing with tears, and saw John standing over her, face cut, coat torn, but smiling faintly through the storm. "You don't listen worth a damn," he said, voice rough but tender. "Neither do you," she answered, a laughed, low and deep, and something in that sound broke the wall between them at last. Dion. That night, the ranch glowed with lanterns and firelight. The flood had spared the hospital, though much of the pasture lay under water. The rescued boy slept peacefully thanks to Clara's care. John stood at the porch, watching lightning fade across the horizon. When Clara joined him, he spoke without turning. "If this land from dust," he said quietly. "Thought if I had enough cattle, enough gold, I'd never feel poor again. But the truth is," he paused, swallowing, "I've been empty all this time." She looked at him, the brave cowboy millionaire, strong and silent, suddenly bare as the prairie itself. "You're not empty, John," she said gently. "You were just waiting to be found." He turned, eyes meeting hers, and in that moment there was no sound but the soft hiss of rain. He reached out, hesitated, then brushed a wet strand of hair from her cheek. "Clara," he whispered, "I spent half my life chasing what don't last. Maybe it's time me hold on to what does." She smiled through tears. "And what would that be?" "You." The word hung between them like a bow. Then she stepped forward and kissed him, slow, trembling, but certain. The storm outside faded to a hush. For the first time, the millionaire cowboy and the nurse who had once frozen in the snow found work no fire could match. Dion. The months that followed became legend. Together they rebuilt the bridge, opened the valley's first hospital, and gave shelter to travelers stranded by weather or war. People from mills around came to Westran Ranch not just for medicine, but for hope. And every visitor heard the story, how a rich cowboy had once found a freezing nurse at a lonely train station, and how that moment changed not only their lives, but the heart of the West itself. Years later, when Raymond laid a new line through the valley, they named the stop Clara's Crossing. Dion. But the world does not rest long, and peace never lasts forever. One autumn morning, riders came with word, a fever was spreading through the frontier towns. The same sickness that had decidedly wept through mining camps and forts was now moving east, fast. Clara knew what it meant. She packed her satchel before dawn. John found her in the stable, tightening the saddle on her mare. "You're not bowing," he said quietly. She didn't look up. "You know you must. Those towns have no doctors, no nurses. If he can help, Clara, you nearly died once in a storm. He won't let you ride into another." She turned then, eyes steady as ever. "You didn't let me die then. You won't let me forget who I am now." A step closer, Joe said, hands trembling though he tried to hide it. "And who are you?" She smiled sadly. "Yours, but still a nurse." I looked at her a long time, then nodded slowly. "Then I'm coming with you." And so they rode together once more, through dust instead of snow this time, to figures against the dying sun, bound not by comfort but by courage. Dion. They reached the mining town of Red Bluff by nightfall. The sickness had taken hold hard, men delirious, children coughing, fear thick as smoke. Clara walked without sleep for 3 days straight, her hands raw, her eyes red. John hauled water, chopped firewood, and carried the sick to safety. Then, on the 4th night, she stumbled. John caught her before she fell. Her forehead burned like fire. "No," he whispered, panic rising. "Clara, no." But she smiled faintly, her voice a whisper. "It's all right. I've had more life than most ever dream." He held her close, the same way he had in that snowstorm years ago. "Don't you dare say goodbye," he said through tears. She touched his face. "You once gave me your coat. You gave me warm when the world was cold. If he lived now, I still carry that warm forever." He pressed his forehead to hers, silent. The candlelight flickered, and outside, the wind rose softly, like a lullaby. Dion, Dion, Dion. When spring returned again, Clara Winslow Westran was laid to rest beneath the cottonwoods she had once married under. The valley bloomed around her, and her name lived in every whisper of the wind. John Westran never remarried, evived a chapel by the river and spent his days tending to the land she had loved. Every year, when the snow fell and the first train whistled echoed through the pass, he would ride to Clara's crossing and stand upon the platform, hat in hand, as if still waiting for her train to come. And maybe, in some way, it always did, in the way the snow drifted gently down, in the way the light broke through the clouds. For love like theirs does not end with time. It lives on in the land, in the stories told around campfires, in every heart that still believes that a single act of kindness can change the course of a lifetime. Dion, 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 to send the tale of John Westran and Clara Winslow, the millionaire cowboy and the freezing Norse, whose love, born of storm and sacrifice, became the legend that made history.